Ladies and gentlemen, you've been invited to a most special of occasions. This week on Historically High, we're gonna make you an offer you can't refuse.
I literally did watch The Godfather.
Yeah, well,
for research for this.
I feel like it needs to. That's a big part of the Mafia legend, I think, is just all of the cinema and pop culture and shit that we've gotten out of the Mafia.
Yeah.
Because it's everywhere.
We romanticize the fuck out of it.
Yeah.
It can still be violent as shit, but everyone's just like, oh, it seems charming.
Yeah, let's play the game. Let's watch the movie.
These guys are so likable. Yeah, they got crazy names. That guy over there to my left, he's the Tom Hagen to my Michael Corleone. Again, Godfather reference. He's the Tony to my Polly Walnuts.
That's not Jersey Shore, right?
No.
Okay.
No.
All right.
That's Sopranos. Professor
Adam.
What's a really Italian name?
Professor Adam has a confession. I have never watched.
The Godfather?
No. The
Sopranos?
Godfather, yes, the series.
Sopranos.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if we were just poor and didn't have HBO and I kind of missed it in a time frame and then could never go back because
There's so much other new stuff and everything.
Well, yeah, and it fell at that point in time where, like, if you were watching it back, it would have the black bars on the sides of the screen because it was in standard format or whatever. And the small picture on the big wide thing just really
There's
throws
something
me
that
off.
throws you off about that.
Yeah.
I think I've made it through a couple seasons of it, actually.
I feel like it's a fun show. I feel like doing this research and then thinking about the funness of it, it's like, ooh, we romanticized a lot of the bad shit that they did.
Well, this needs no introduction because you saw the title. Obviously, we are talking about the origins of the Mafia. And, like, specifically, I think we would probably refer to it as the Italian-American Mafia, the mob. Lots of different versions of the Mafia, but I think this one is kind of the most well-known and probably the original. Maybe not even the original, but the most widely known one.
Yeah, I think, like, the Yakuza is a big deal, which technically I think they're kind of like the Japanese Mafia.
Yes.
Covering
Russian
drug
mob.
traffickers. There's a lot of different words that kind of falls into the same thing, and Mafia is just kind of the Italian version of it. They're a gang. It's a gang. It's a cartel.
It's a well-dressed, organized gang.
Yep.
With accents, and they love spaghetti.
And the names of these, I think, are some of my favorites, too.
Oh, fuck yeah. Well, we're not going to beat around the bush anymore. We're not going to cut off a horse's head and shove it in your bed or anything like that. We're going to get straight into the mob. All right, take me back.
This is a story that I think out of all of the Mafia information that I've taken in through, like, pop culture, cinema, things like that, I feel like this isn't just a time in the Mafia where there was a lot more killing. So to call it an actual war, the only reason that it's a war is because this is like two warring factions that are trying to fight for the rights to the United States for the Mafia. Whereas I think there was still a lot of killing, and I think even up until probably like the early 2000s, there was just a ton of unsolved murders in New York and Detroit and Chicago and places like that that were probably attributed to the mob. I mean, it certainly isn't back then what it would be today, just because they could pay people off. There were judges that were in their pockets. So there's still judges in their pockets, probably low-level ones.
Yeah, like if you think of like, not like on a Supreme Court fucking level, but
No,
if you're thinking
they're
of like,
partisan to something else. It's a different kind of mafia.
yeah, there you go. But yeah, definitely at the local level, yeah, 100%.
And really, I mean, the mafia is an export from Italy, and I guess Italy and Sicily's part of Italy, yeah? Or they're not their own nation?
No, I don't believe so.
Okay. Well, Sicily, before it was owned by Italy, before they were annexed in, was ruled by a feudal system. I forgot the people that were in charge of it. That's just so much information came in. But in the early 19th century, the political changes in Sicily kind of helped create the mafia because they started out running protection for feudal lords, any kind of oversight that would come into Sicily. Sicily's an island. It looks like a beautiful place. For some reason, it just always looks super like hot and dry to me.
I think it's Mediterranean.
Yeah.
And if it's a island, I mean, you know, if island has enough time to develop and stuff like that due to the climate, it can have a lot of like vegetation and stuff on it. But there's some places like that are probably more like dry, arid places.
Yeah.
The coast of, I'm pretty sure, because we talked about this when we talked about Greece, is that kind of area. Like Greece is very rocky. That's why the only thing that they could grow a ton of was like olives because they're very like really hardy.
And it was a shallow root.
Yeah, I'm guessing that there's a lot of places down there that can be similar. Fucking look what's right across the Mediterranean. It's fucking it's Africa. It's Egypt.
That's true.
It's hot and dry.
Most of what I know about Sicily comes from this old wise historian, Sophia Petrillo. And she sort of shaped my idea about Sicily because that's where...
Picture it. Sicily. What was the year she always said?
Like 1912 or 1920, something like that. But yeah, it was a place that kind of became ungovernable. After the ruling power left, Italy's like, we want you, we're going to annex you, you're going to be a part of Italy. All this is happening in the middle of the 19th century, so 1800s. And then they're like, well, it's an island off of our coast. We can get there, but we probably don't want to keep a bunch of people there. Like, how do we kind of govern this? Well, during that time of them trying to figure it out, the mafia had changed plans. And just like Chris was talking about things that grow, citrus is a huge thing in Sicily. Sicilian lime, Sicilian lemons. They got all sorts of like other citruses that are like amalgamation or hybrids between the two of them. But they were extremely expensive because growing lemons and growing limes back then was much harder to do in a lot of different climates.
You got to also think too, like that was like rare exotic stuff.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
In certain areas, like if you can get limes somewhere in like France or like up north, that was crazy. Like no one had ever seen limes before, so you could make a shit ton of money. You would just have to make sure that you could like supply them and get them there fast enough before they rotted.
There is a part of me that's sort of jealous of people back then. Couldn't live back then. Definitely wouldn't have survived. But to know that there was just so much new shit that you had never seen or tried before that would just come in on these ships, and you'd be like, "Where's that one from? That one's from Sicily.
What is this?
Yeah, what do we get from Sicily?"
You take a bite of a lemon and it's the just most sour. You've never tasted anything like that before.
You look like that 2-year-old kid that bites the lemon for the first time. Like, whoa, I've never tasted. There's no flavor like this. Like they didn't have. Maybe they had candy and artificial flavors back then, but
first time
nothing.
putting that on fish.
Yeah,
I'm like, this doesn't taste like shit.
That would have to be for a lot of like because you would think like Italians that are emigrating over to the United States probably would have brought some of them over or tried to figure out how to grow them, because that's something that we'll talk about coming up. But back to the citrus industry, these fields were owned by a lot of the wealthier people because coming out of feudalism, yes, there did become more landowners and it wasn't just the rich, but the rich had already had these citrus groves. And the mafia had figured out that if they can infiltrate the citrus groves and they can start scraping off the top, they're going to end up making more money. They're going to be able to sort of change their business of trying to protect feudal lords into trying to squeeze people out of money.
Selling black market lemons.
Yeah, exactly. So this was kind of a great opportunity for them to sneak in and continue to make money in a different way. Once that happens, once you get the rich people under your thumb, you can kind of start weaseling your way into the police department and then the government and kind of start to give yourself a level of protection that you would never had before besides the feudal days.
Start greasing some palms.
Yeah, which worked really well for a very long time. And then all of a sudden, 1925, this guy named Benito Mussolini, who can't quite seem to get anything right in his life ever, comes along with fascism in Italy. And I believe he pushed his way up through World War I, just like Hitler did, and kind of rose to prominence. And fascism, I don't think it's good, but at the same time, I don't know if the mafia is good, so it's kind of a more good, less good competition. But Chris was telling me before, and it makes total sense, the Mafia is not going to be under Mussolini's thumb, and Mussolini's not going to be in the Mafia's pocket.
It's competing powers.
Yeah, exactly.
Regardless of what level of power. Like Mussolini could control the government, but because these guys technically have certain politicians and police, what's going to happen when they get replaced by Mussolini's guys? They're not going to have the same type of luxuries that they've been used to.
Yeah, and it changes the whole game for both sides. Mussolini ends up winning out. There was a lot of immigration kind of after World War I to America from Italy and Sicily specifically. So there was already kind of the groundwork for the Mafia in the United States already. The thing that these first Sicilians and Italians did once they made it to the U.S., they created kind of these mob networks and connections. And if you're trying to get passage over the United States and you're poor, if you have somebody that can go through and say, hey, I got a job lined up for you when you get here.
Like a sponsor.
Yep.
Yeah, like you've been sponsored.
I'll front you guys the money for safe passage across the Atlantic. Once you get here, I'll put you right to work. And once you go to work, you can start paying me back. Oh, and I'm going to tack on like 300% interest on this. And if you can't start paying me back, then I'm going to start pulling you off of work and sending you to do other jobs that are more mob related. You're going to be a part of these rackets that I'm creating in the United States.
Banking on people not being able to pay it back.
Yeah.
Having foot soldiers, things like that. And then at the same time, you're thinking like, well, why are these people accepting this to come over if the conditions are so horrible? Well, it's because not only was shit getting bad in Italy, and at that point, and I'm sure it's still a big thing of like Sicilian pride and everything, that maybe they kind of consider themselves. I was actually looking it up, and so Sicily and the other islands technically kind of under Italy, but they're also considered kind of like an autonomous region.
So kind of like Australia and England. And
Maybe something like that.
like a Commonwealth of Italy, maybe?
Yeah, but there has to be a certain thing where you're your own thing, but now Mussolini's coming in and is going to be like shoving Italian down your fucking throat. So you could see where people would be kind of almost forced into that situation to where the guys that are already there established in, New York and the larger cities are like fucking perfect. There's already neighborhoods they can move into. We have a power base established. Now we have people that we can actually put to work.
Yeah, and they capitalized on a lot of poor people's sort of backs. And that's the other thing too, is when you come over to a new country, you get a job, you need a place to live, and this is where we kind of start seeing the populations. I'm really excited for the Ellis Island episode, and just to talk about like how places like Little Italy were formed or anything like that. It's no surprise that New York is so full of these boroughs and has famous Little Italy and Little China and everything like that, when Ellis Island was the first stop that they could get off at. And then they're like, okay, well, we'll go into the city. And then, oh, okay, well, we'll find our little areas. And that's where these places sprang up. Unfortunately, when you get there and you're poor and you're trying to pay your entire check to your mafia boss, you have to live in pretty bad conditions. And so there was already this predisposition from the mob in America saying, well, these guys that are coming over from Sicily are shaking me down in the street. I'm getting robbed by these guys. And then you have these poor Sicilians and these poor Italians come over into America, and you're like, oh, so they're dirty and they try to steal from me. And you start getting these stereotypes built up where every Italian person that you see is going to be a mobster.
It was like there was a series of times when different people came over in like droves, like different immigrants from other countries. Basically, like when a new group started coming in, you had to imagine that the group that was previously the ones getting shit on were like, oh, thank God. Like, I don't know when it was like how long the Irish took shit and everything, and everyone was being bashed on the Irish. But as soon as if it was before the Italians and the Italians rolled into town, they're like, yes, fucking finally. Somebody they hate worse than us.
You walk up to one of them in a bar, or you hear a language in a bar that you've never heard of before, and you walk over, you're like, any English? Like, very little. You're like, you're new to this country? Like, yes. Like, where are you from? Italy. You turn around, you're like, hey, this Italian stole $5 from my wallet.
Are there a lot of you? Tons. Perfect.
We're coming over in droves. So you kind of start to get this negative stereotype. A big player in today that we're going to start out with is Giuseppe Joe the Boss Masseria. Masseria arrived in 1902 at the age of 16 into the United States from Sicily. He worked his way up through the Morello crime family. Morello ends up getting iced. I believe I keep wanting to say Tom Morello, but I think that that's a musician. I'm pretty sure it's a musician.
Tom DeLonge is a musician.
Yeah, I think Tom Morello is too. But it's like Peter Morello, something like that. He's got a very Italian name. Yeah, Morello ends up kind of getting iced before all this sort of kicks off. But by the 1920s, he was a boss over almost all of the mafia operations in the United States.
Before we get to there, I do want to go back just a little bit.
Okay.
So 1878, there was this guy, coincidentally also named Giuseppe. Was Giuseppe like Tom?
I think they have like 8 different names.
Yeah. So Giuseppe Esposito. So he ends up fleeing Sicily with 6 other Sicilians to New York. He had murdered 11 of these wealthy landowners that you were kind of talking about over in Sicily. The chancellor of a Sicilian province, and the vice chancellor. So I don't know if it was just him and him, like combined with the other 6 guys that he fled.
But it had to have been a group effort because you can't knock off that many important people by yourself.
But
Unless
he
you're
was one of kind of
RoboCop.
the first ones that came over. He got extradited like 3 years later, but they said he kind of brought over some of the influence and set kind of some of the early seeds for it to have other people, be established.
It's a bad guy to sow the seeds because he just killed a bunch of people. So he's probably pretty cool with that.
There was also this thing where they would come over and they would just lay low for 3 years. They would go take even if they were coming over and they were already previously established as part of
made
the
men.
they would come over and they would work just these normal fucking manual labor jobs for 3 years because after 3 years they couldn't extradite you or something like that. It was
that's
some type of
tricky.
rule, yeah.
Bet you it wasn't a new immigrant that figured out that rule.
Yeah.
And also at the same time, if you're working there for 3 years and you're establishing relationships, once you try to go on board and start bringing people in, you already have friends there that can help you out.
And like you were saying, getting filtered from Ellis Island, kind of settling these areas. Once people were settled in areas, they started branching out to other areas. And you had Italian immigrants in neighborhoods like East Harlem, the Lower East Side, Brooklyn. And essentially in the 1890s, you get this thing called the 5 Points Gang. And it was founded by this guy named Paul Kelly. And it was centered in Little Italy. And
An Irish person settled something in Little Italy?
I don't know if Kelly could have been an Italian name and just had maybe a Irish father and then down through I don't know.
Yeah, I was thinking Charlie Kelly, maybe.
Very, very different. So the 5 Points if anyone has ever seen Gangs of New York,
Yes.
that's kind of takes
It's
place with
great.
Bill the Butcher and all the dead rabbits and everything. That kind of takes place in the area of 5 Points. And I called him Kelly's Kiddos because he basically got a whole bunch of just neighborhood rapscallions and everything, but basically had a bunch of kids working for him and were basically grooming them to be mobsters. Some of the names of the kids that were actually working, some of Kelly's Kiddos. So John Torrio, Frankie Yale, Lucky Luciano, and Al Capone had all worked under this guy. And as New York is kind of filling up as well, you start to get, you kind of mentioned it, alluded to it earlier, you get places like Chicago that are going to go ahead and attract this. Any place that there's money to be made and essentially kind of a black market for things and vices. Wherever there's people, there's vices. Wherever there's vices, there's going to be someone that wants to make money by filling them.
Well, and also they're port towns.
Yeah.
They're towns that you can get things by boat from.
Sneak things in.
Yep.
It's also really close to the Canadian border. If you need to sneak things in across the border or anything, it's kind of in that area too.
Yeah, because we have, and we'll talk about them, not a lot, but right kind of towards the end, there's a Buffalo Mafia. There's a Buffalo crime or a family in Mafia.
There's in New Orleans, Dallas.
Yes.
Anywhere outside, I think they said of New York, they can have multiple families as they still do in New York. But outside of that, they usually limit any other city to just one family.
Well, if you think about it, Buffalo is literally right on the border with Canada.
Yeah.
So if you're trying to pass things through that way, you have like a middleman crime family.
Warehouses and stuff that you can hold stuff to
Yeah.
then ship it out to other places.
I wonder if they were doing the Chapo thing before Chapo, where they were digging tunnels underneath the border.
Don't think there was enough surveillance that they had to worry about that.
That's true, actually.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, pretty smart.
So kind of getting back into what you were saying, we're kind of entering the Prohibition area, and this is where the fucking mob finds its rhythm, and it finds its niche, and basically explodes. So Prohibition, if you haven't listened to the episode, we didn't really get into a lot of the mob. We did cover Al Capone quite a bit throughout the episode, but not so much the New York mob. Go back, listen to that one. But it took it was enacted and actually went into effect, January 16th, 1919. Well, early 1920s, like Adam's getting to right now, Mussolini really starts to crack down. So he took power, like Adam was saying, back in 1925. But as he really starts to crack down, more and more Sicilian mobsters have to keep coming over here. And now there's kind of a power structure. And you start to get the formation of these different families. You're starting to get into prohibition where you're needing positions that you never even considered. Like previously, if you were running protection rackets, things like that, smuggling, you would need, your enforcers to go around to collect the money, to intimidate. You would need a couple other guys, but now you're in a situation where you're trying to smuggle alcohol in. So not only do you have to have transport guys, you now have to have lawyers. You got to have your enforcers, like I was saying, and prohibition kind of leads to the more structured version of the mob that people are more familiar with, which is the family structure.
Well, so much of it too, just beyond prohibition, by far and away was the best thing that ever happened to the mob.
Oh yeah, 100%.
But along those lines, there's other rackets that they've gotten into that are just the most pedestrian. They sound funny now. I'm sure they sucked dick back then if you were a part of that. But like they had an ice racket in Harlem where the guy that went around and delivered ice to the refrigerators, the big blocks of ice to the refrigerators, was run by the mob. They gave them protection. They helped them out. They
When
skimmed
you
off
always
the
think
top.
about like he works in sanitation or anything like that, they're so just like they seem mundane or kind of like behind the scenes type stuff, but they make money. But they also, by being not really heavily looked at or in the public eye, you can also do shady shit and no one's really looking into them too deeply.
Well, and if the butcher goes to the police, he's like, hey, these Italian guys just showed up and they're shaking me down. They're charging me 5 cents a steak to stand outside my restaurant and make sure nobody breaks in, even though I've never had a break-in before in my entire life. Because
They're technically making sure that they don't have to then turn around and break into my place.
Yeah.
Because that's what the protection rackets exactly were. It was going in and being like, you have a lovely place here. It'd be a shame if anything happened. And you'd be like, well, nothing has happened up to this point. We're pretty well known in the neighborhood. Everyone really likes us. Something will happen. And you're going to want to pay us. Basically, you were paying them to not fuck up your place.
Yeah.
And that was the protection. They were protecting themselves from themselves.
It just, the rackets that they got into, and like Chris was talking about in sanitation, when these things come on board, you have to have an influx of people that are going to do them. And if you have a bunch of immigrants that are there of a certain ethnicity, say Italian, say Irish, anybody that comes in,
Willing to work for less
Yeah.
than the populace.
so if you're filling those voids there, that's where you start to be able to control labor unions, because X amount of the population of your workers are going to be Italian. And there were some pretty interesting claims made by Lucky Luciano that we may or may not get. Lucky's going to get his own episode for sure. I believe we already mentioned Lucky in the Las Vegas episode, probably, because him and Meyer Lansky were boys, and Meyer Lansky was huge in Vegas, but I don't think Lucky was in the United States at that point in time. But they were able to control kind of the means of production for things. Like, as far as all the guys that were working in the naval yards, like Chris said, they're going to take less money because they're immigrants. So when you control a certain amount of the naval yards, it's a pretty big chess piece to be like, well, if you try to touch me, if you try to arrest me, I'll pull all these guys off the job, and then what are you going to do? So
Do you think that's where the in with unions came?
yeah,
Yeah.
I really think so, just because of if you can build that, I guess, fan base with however well you treat them, you're like, come to my side, come to my side. And then eventually,
I'm looking out for you guys.
Yeah.
But you guys need me to be looking out for you.
so just like unions do now, I'm going to take a piece of your checkout as a protection fund. Is that
That takes us up to like the 20s, like prohibition kind of kicking off and everything.
okay? These guys like Masseria that were in charge of these mafia operations, if it wasn't a Masseria-led area, and a lot of these operations, like Chris was talking about, they're kind of broken up by family, but their families are based upon like where they came from. So like there'll be Palermo gangs that are from Palermo. There'll be Castellamarese gangs that are going to be from Castellamarese, just all these different towns because they spoke the same dialect. Sicily has like a crazy amount of different like variations on their language that they speak. But you would get together. That's how you would form these gangs. If you had an issue with turf or anything like that, you would steal the other guy's booze shipment. And then they would steal yours back. And then there would be somebody shot and killed. And then things would kind of slow down. So without a unified front, you kind of had everybody battling. And it's not great for business. This will be a strong kind of underlying detail through a lot of this. Business isn't good when there's blood being shed.
Not only that, so you're losing members of your workforce and
Yeah.
everything, regardless of what role they're in. Not only that, but when like murders are happening, the police are going to start investigating and poking into any and all businesses that are related to it. You essentially, the whole point of this is to operate behind the scenes.
Yeah, what happens if one of your guys gets shot out of your whiskey still factory or whatever you have going on that's supposed to be secret, and then the police come and investigate, they're like, well, where was he? He was in there, well, let's go in there and see if there's any clues. Boom, you're shut down selling your liquor because you don't have a distribution site anymore because of that. So, Giuseppe, we'll just call him Joe because Giuseppe's a lot to say.
Joe the boss.
Yeah. Joe was a bit of an oaf. Kind of growing up the way that he did, he wasn't really learned and understood, and you'll understand why that's important coming up when we meet his foil. But Joe was pretty ham-handed in what he did. Very, very racist. Did not like anybody from any other ethnicities. And this was at a time, like when you were talking about the 5 Points gang, there was commingling between Jewish, Irish, Italians that are in these gangs that kind of grow up together. One of the guys that you also mentioned, Lucky Luciano, grew up, he got to the United States when he was like 9. He actually grew up being best friends with Meyer Lansky. And Meyer Lansky was very, very high up in the Jewish mafia. He worked under a guy, I'm going out on a limb with this one, Arnold Rothstein, I believe his name was the leader of the Jewish gang. And Rothstein was we keep things tidy, we play nice with others, we just want to make money. We don't want to make war. We just want to make money.
That's the whole point.
Yeah.
That's the whole point of this, is they see opportunities to make money, and the only reason they ever go to war is because one of them sees them making more money and then wants a piece of that.
And Masseria was so quick to shoot or kill somebody or rob somebody else's truck that the Italian scene was kind of not necessarily up for grabs, but it was just sort of a house of cards. And once a disruptor shows up, shit kind of gets real. And the disruptor's name was Salvador Little Caesar Maranzano. And Salvi was a big, big fan of Caesar, hence the nickname Little Caesar.
Well, one thing too, kind of jumping back to Joe the Boss, it did take him a little bit, but he did end up working his way up through, what was at that time?
The
Morello crime. Yeah, the Morello crime family. So a lot of these are going to be interchangeable of these crime families. A lot of them are founded by the people with that name, and then they become another one. There's essentially 5 main families in New York, and we'll kind of go through those names.
Yeah.
But they always kind of like, they start out as one thing, and then they become what they currently are for their current iteration. But he ends up working his way up through the Morello crime family at the time, and by the 20s, he was actually the boss over almost all of the mafia operations in the U.S. So you kind of got to wonder, like, you can work your way up. I think what it is it's a product of the time.
Yeah.
How he was for that time in that environment allowed him to get into the position that he was, whether it be through force, trickery, a combination of the two, probably most likely. But we're going to talk about here coming up, but adaptation is one of the biggest things that is kind of the current running theme for why a lot of this shit goes down, is because you have people that don't want to adapt, that think it's just going to work this way forever. And then you have this new way of thinking where it's like, fuck all your preconceived notions or hatreds toward other people. We just want to make fucking money.
Yeah. And a lot of it will be the changing of the guard that sort of concludes this. There's a term that they use for these old guys called Mustache Petes. Mustache Petes are people that lived in Sicily, that kind of grew up over there and understood the Sicilian way of the mafia's life. The younger generation would be generations that grew up in the United States with a lot of immersion into other cultures and understanding that just because you see these people one time and they do something bad, they're not all bad people.
Also growing up in it.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
finding it later in life, like maybe some of these Sicilian guys did that are older and didn't get really into like, they didn't even establish themselves possibly in the country until later in life. Whereas you have this younger, kind of this younger generation that is participating in, I'm not saying they're going out and like fucking killing anyone, but there are so many different levels within the mafia. You could just simply be like running money back and forth, or you could be just selling something to somebody else, like on behalf of them. So you have these people that are growing up and have almost like training from a young age into this lifestyle.
Well, and a trust of anybody outside of the Italian lineage and outside of the Sicilian lineage, because they, for the most part, stuck together. And the Mustache Petes definitely were like, we only do business with Sicilians. We only do business with people from Palermo. Whereas the new guys are like, but I grew up with this Jewish kid that's in a gang now, and he's always been cool with me. We'll split shit 50-50. Like, let's bring him in. And
I'm making so much more, like, there's so much of a bigger pool to fucking fish from. You guys are literally just like, at some point, if you're only hiring Sicilians and everything like that, you're making a lot of concessions because you're not picking from the widest selection of people. No. You don't have a lot of like, it's just going to be a lot of like middle of the road type guys. Whereas if you're willing to branch out, you can kind of get the best of the best. One thing too, when Marzano was sent over, I think he was actually sent over from the head of the like Castellamarese family, right? So they were centered in the Sicilian region of
Castellamarese.
Yes. And so he was almost sent over. You still had a presence in Sicily. He was sent over essentially to take over that portion of the Italian mob in New York. So he's basically like the new guy, new management for this group.
Well, and when he came over, he was a made man. Mm-hmm. When he came over, like you say, he was ready to come over and make this run. He loved the Roman Empire. He loved Caesar. He actually was, well, first off, before he found his love of Caesar, he started out his life as a priest in Sicily, which is crazy to think that you go to divinity school or whatever it is. And
we just talked about this, about covering like Stalin.
Yeah.
Stalin went to go train to become a priest, and we don't know if it's because that was just one of the jobs that you could do, was going to the priesthood because they always needed priests, or if it was like what your parents forced you into. But man, big left turn. Yeah. Big left turn in the other direction.
I think he probably did take a little bit of that priestly, able to pump people up, talk to people, kind of seem, he wasn't sympathetic.
Presence, like have a gravitas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He dressed well. Like I say, his obsession with Caesar would kind of help because he would be able to, it's funny that he loves Caesar and how he goes out. But like the fact that he was so into Roman culture that he kind of wanted to run his gang in a similar fashion to the way that the Roman Empire was run. Mm-hmm. Everybody had to answer to somebody. He was the boss of all bosses for the Castellamarese. He was going to make sure that what he said went, and he was going to rule with an iron fist. Mm-hmm. So when you come over here, the complete juxtaposition of Joe Masseria, where Joe's just like trying to mash it in all the time, and Maranzano's like, well, I don't want my guys to do that. I'm in charge of my guys. Castellamarese, come with me. We're going to stop screwing around with Joe so much. And Joe didn't like that too much. So Joe, I believe this was in Detroit, orders a hit in 1930 on a Castellamarese-born guy named Vito Bonaventure. Bonaventre?
Sure.
Or Bonventre, yeah, something.
Bonventre.
There you go.
Bonaventre. There you go.
Prior to the murder, the actual crime boss, Niccolo Schiro, that was the founder of the Schiro family crime family, so he's like, well, you didn't back me up when I had a problem with Capone, and you sided with Capone, and that kind of pissed me off. So I'm going to try to flex my nuts. You pay me $10,000 and you go ahead and skedaddle and get out of here, and you won't be killed.
Was this Masseria he was talking about?
Masseria was talking to Schiro.
Oh, okay.
And Shiro's like, okay, I'm out. Vito Bonventre was the guy that took Shiro's spot. And so the first guy he paid him off and then ran. Vito stuck around, and Vito was sleeping with the fishes. Vito got killed pretty quickly. And at that point in time, the Castellamarese that are run by Maranzano are like, well, we can't let that happen. So Giuseppe Joe Morello, the head of the Morello crime family, the guy that was in charge of Masseria, was the next member to get hit in response to Vito's dying.
Mm-hmm.
So we're starting to see
Is it a tit for tat? It starts becoming a tit for tat type thing.
Except for instead of like stealing trucks, we're going to start knocking off bosses and everybody.
We're cutting the head off the snake.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, Masseria being a ham-handed individual is going to be somebody that's going to not do things in a clean way and just thinking that he's the shit. He's going to end up being like, well, I can do whatever I want. And then Maranzano hits him. Maranzano was swift, concise. They didn't make any pleas for money. He didn't say that he was mad about the bribe or anything like that. He's like, okay, well, you made one guy pay a bribe. You ran him off. You killed the next guy. I'm not even going to like dignify that with a response. We're just going straight to death. So immediately it was like, we're going to ratchet this shit up all the way to the top.
So this is where we get to the Castellamarese War, correct? Yep. Okay.
Yeah. Along with Vito's murder, Masseria ordered a hit on a guy named Gaetano Reina.
We're going to be throwing a lot of names at you guys. Basically, you just looked at it this way. Someone's going to kill someone on this side. That side's then going to retaliate and kill someone else. And it goes back and forth for a little while with just these two sides, basically. One under Joe the Boss, one under Maranzano, just trying to fucking put each other in the ground.
Yeah, we'll lay out the teams here in a second, but the teams are kind of moot because we start to see a lot of flip-flopping to kind of protect each other.
Also within this sided war between the Castellamarese and then also Joe the Boss, there's like a secondary battle going on here, and this is the generational one that me and Adam were talking about, where you have this they called themselves the Young Turks. We looked up to try to find why they were called the Young Turks, couldn't find shit about it. So if someone knows, please comment and send us the information.
Yes, please.
But you have this younger, open-minded, more business-minded, I think, kind of younger generation. And like me and Adam have talked about, they are just basically like, we don't think you should just limit your businesses to these people working with these people. Money is money. Green is green. It's going to go ahead and fucking spend. Also, we can branch out into a lot of other endeavors by making partnerships with these other people. So we shouldn't be afraid to do this. So you have on both sides older school Mustache Petes, and then you have the Young Turks. So there's like this weird kind of class war going on as well.
And I'm sure the kids are probably communicating more than the bosses. Like, we don't like this shit. We don't want to kill you. If we get an order, we're going to have to do something. But we'll kind of see where there's a little bit of a heads up given from the younger guys to protect the other younger guys.
Yeah.
So Gaetano Reina was the next person to be hit on the Maranzano side. And his hit was actually given to a young Vito Genovese, who is going to be a big part of the crime families coming up. And basically, as soon as that happened and Gaetano was killed, it came back around really, really quick. The Reina family hired hitmen to kill a guy named Joe Pinzolo. And Pinzolo had just taken over the Harlem Ice distribution racket for Masseria. So, like, the guy that he put in charge of a very important racket that they had going on, Maranzano's just like, we're getting rid of him.
Do you think they used a really bad ice pun?
Like, we're gonna put him on ice.
Maybe that's where the term ice comes from, is this dude.
The Iceman cometh.
But that happened, and this wasn't a long war. Like, this happened September 9th, 1930. And I think we're going to be wrapped up kind of in September 1931. So it was like
They're not fucking around. And here's the thing, too, is this is very condensed.
Yeah.
Like, that's why we're naming so many of these names, because they're going to come in to be players later down the road. And so it is a very small community of these families. You don't really know the names of a lot of, like, the foot soldiers or, like, the associates that they had and everything. But the guys that are kind of making the decisions are going to be kind of interchangeable as far as moving up the ranks and kind of having their own families.
And that's where we can kind of get into the starting point of the teams. Joe Morello,
Masseria team.
Yeah, Masseria's team was Joe Morello, gone. Lucky Luciano, it's going to become a very big part of this. Al Capone, like Chris said, grew up with Luciano in that 5 points. Albert Anastasia, another guy that's going to come in pretty big.
I love that pronunciation of it, not Anastasia. Anastasia.
Is that how you spell Anastasia too?
Yeah, like
Like that movie that Disney did?
like about the Russian girl or whatever. Yeah. Huh. So you have Anastasia, the Russian pronunciation. You have Anastasia.
Yeah. Anastasia sounds better.
Apollonia. That's the name.
Vito Genovese, fucking love that one. Manfrede Mineo, Joe
like that
Adonis.
I like that one.
Manfrede?
It makes me think of
A little bit. Joe Adonis and Carlo Gambino, which the Gambino crime family still to this day.
the name rings a bell.
Yes, exactly. Maranzano's team, another just fucking fantastic name.
Can I say this name?
Joe Bonanno.
Joe Bonanno.
You got to do it with your hands.
Bonanno.
Yep.
You gotta act like you're talking to a little mouse in your hands when you talk.
This guy has never had a more Italian name. Stefano Magadino. Just
Should
sweet.
have been a ball player.
Joe, he does sound like he could have played left field for the Yankees, huh? Joe Profassi, Joe Aiello, Tommy Gagliano.
Love that fucking last name.
It's so good.
Bring me Tommy Gagliano.
Tommy Lucchesi and the Reina crew, which we talked about a little bit with the hit back. They're probably not going to come up too much more. Tommy Lucchesi also probably played shortstop for the Red Sox at some point. It just really sounds the same thing. To help bring Capone kind of back to Masseria's side, because Capone was just kind of he was a wild child of the mafia. Like he's like, yeah, I'll get to what you want me to do. But to kind of earn his trust back, Masseria and Maranzano, Masseria had one of Maranzano's Chicago allies, Joe Aiello, whacked October 23rd, 1930. So we're going September 9th from one whacking to October 23rd with the next whacking.
So was the purpose of that to like basically show Capone like this can happen to you if you don't come back, or was that someone that Capone had as a rival that they were doing like as a favor and being like, see, we like you?
I think it was more of Joe Aiello was a contender with the Chicago outfit.
Okay.
And so it was like, we're going to knock off your competition.
We're trimming the competition for you.
Well, at the same time, knowing that Chicago was a very big market that would hurt Maranzano if he lost his boss.
True.
November 5th, again, just speeding through these deaths. So many deaths so quick. Maranzano gunman killed Mineo and one of his lieutenants outside of an apartment where he was actually meeting with Masseria and his guys. Masseria and his guys escaped, but Mineo and his lieutenant and their security all got gunned down by Maranzano's boys.
We are in the age of the Tommy gun here, people.
Yeah, these two guys were nuts. I don't remember which one. I want to say it was Maranzano because it feels like it was something that he did. They both traveled in limousines that had bulletproof glass. They both had security around them basically 24/7.
How thick was that fucking glass? Because
Back
it
then?
wasn't. It
Yeah.
was glass.
Uh-huh.
It was literally glass thick enough to be bulletproof. Whereas nowadays, I know that sounds stupid the way I said that. Nowadays, it's not glass. It's like a composite of sheets pressed together and condensed, and it's like a polymer and everything. But
Still thicker than a normal window, but back then it would have had to have been like 5 inches of glass.
you're also thinking of the caliber of rounds too,
Yeah.
that people are firing.
Probably a lot less force. But one of them inside of their limousine, in the trunk of their limousine, had a full 360-degree spinning machine gun.
Hell yeah.
Just in case they got into a firefight and they needed it. One of kind of the crazy things that I forgot to mention about Maranzano and kind of the Catholic thing was they had interviewed people that had worked under him before, and he said that the night before they were going to go kill somebody or they were going to have a shootout or anything like that, Maranzano was almost like religious with his practices of loading his guns and cleaning his guns.
That reminds me of Liam Neeson's character in Gangs of New York. 'Cause
Yeah.
he was the priest or something like that, and he would go to his altar and he would like before he went out to fucking fight Bill the Butcher.
Yeah, he was so very good with what he did.
These guys were very religious too.
Yeah.
Like regardless, despite what they did, these people were very religious. They just felt, I think, that if they did enough like charitable stuff, because they did do charitable stuff, maybe it could balance the scales of this, or maybe they just figured they would settle up afterward and be like, I'll just get absolved. I'll just, because can't you just do that? Can't you go in and do confession? And
Yeah.
it would be like the confession at the very end of the life, like, how much time you got, Padre? I got a big list and I need to be absolved of all this shit.
Max, you give me 10 Hail Marys, 10 Holy Jesuses. We'll call it good.
Two options. One, you just say I can be absolved of all my sins, or I'm going to list off a lot of the bad things I've done.
Just blanket immunity. Can we just say that? I'm going to give you 5.
Blanket blessing.
Yeah.
Just give me a blanket blessing.
So after that, after Mineo goes down, the big issue for that was Mineo had taken over for a guy named Sal D'Aquila, which was the D'Aquila crime family that Miserio had grown up with. Like that was a part. It was Morello, and then the D'Aquila was the other one, or the I don't know how to fucking say it. It's D apostrophe Aquila. But that was another crime family that he was working with, and D'Aquila was sort of like the sage advice giver that would kind of be able to control Miseria, and when Miseria had an issue, he would go to him. He's like the only guy that Miseria would
Like his
listen to.
consigliere.
Yeah. Is that
So, okay,
something similar?
I'm just going to knock the ranks out right now, so when we
Yes,
can use the
thank
terms,
you.
we know where they're going to stand up. So, 5-family structure of New York. Here we go. We got the boss, also known as the Don. We have the underboss. We then have the consigliere. Now, the consigliere isn't really in a rank. He's basically like the advisor to the Don. Think of the hand of the king, if you will.
He's the oracle.
Yes, basically. Yep. Below that, we have the capos, and the capos is basically captains. So capos only answer to the boss and the underboss, but they also kind of run their own crews. So again, kind of like the captains. You then have the soldiers or the made men. And made men, when they say that term, basically it was that you had essentially paid your dues and you also fit a certain qualification. And for a while, like early on, kind of like the traditional stuff Adam was talking about, you had to have like 2 Italian parents. Like you had to be just like super Italian to even be considered to be a made man.
I think a lot of them had to have a body under their belt too.
Yeah.
I think a lot of them had to have
You had
a
to
kill.
prove your loyalty by doing certain things. They had a little ceremony where they would like cut their finger. Like it was symbolic for a lot of stuff, and kind of like a nice classy jumping in ceremony.
It was somewhere between being jumped into a gang and like joining a fraternity.
Yes, exactly.
It was that
But
sweet
a class
spot.
or like a cigar club, like
Okay,
a
yeah.
combination of all of them, because it was fancy too. But those were pretty much the people that were within the families. Now there were a lot of people like foot soldiers that actually, or like lesser what they called associates, that they would use for like work and things like that.
Yeah.
But these were the only people that actually carried like status in these families. And normally the guys that we're talking about getting killed, they're not mentioning if they're killing, Joe the driver that runs the booze.
Yeah.
These guys are made men as part of these families. So, it's a big deal when these guys get killed because they've been with this family, they've paid their dues, they're hard to replace.
Well, and just to explain that perfectly at the hard to replace level was after Mineo gets killed, he gets replaced by a guy named Frank Scalisi. And Scalisi, seeing boss after boss be killed, is like, ooh, this Maranzano guy is probably a little tougher than Miseria. He seems to be getting the better of him now. I'm going to go cut a deal with Miseria. So the guy that Masseria just brings in immediately is like, I'm going to the other guy. I think the other guy's got a better game plan. So he just lost that lieutenant or that boss, that consigliere, like you were talking about. Like you start to see Masseria's guys who weren't trained very well by him and don't really have a lot of loyalty being like, this guy's pretty professional. I feel like he's probably going to run a little better racket than we've been going. After Scalisi leaves, the migration from more of the Masseria families just immediately begins. February 3rd, 1931, Masseria suffers another loss of Lieutenant Joseph Cantagna.
Cantagna.
And at that point, Masseria was really only retaliating. Like he never took a strong grasp on this war ever again. It was just pot shots that he was firing up.
It
over
was just
the
counterattacks. Like he was getting hit, getting pushed back, and then he would like launch his little counteroffensive, but he was never actually like making any headway.
And one of Messeria's top guys, Lucky Luciano, that was working under him, kind of working away from him because him and Meyer Lansky were partners in their kind of own little thing. Messeria didn't like Meyer Lansky, so Luciano was kind of kept at a distance, but at the same time, he was very powerful because they were very successful. Luciano and Vito Genovese end up taking a secret meeting with Maranzano. Maranzano tells them, hey, boys, Messeria was the one that started this. Messeria came after my guy first. I've only retaliated to killings that have happened that have come from Messeria. I know this is bad for business. I know that you guys could be making more money if we weren't at war. Mm-hmm. I also know that you don't like working for Messeria because he takes a cut out of everything that you have. If we end this and Messeria goes away, I promise that I won't hold any grudges against anybody.
No retaliation.
No retaliation after the Messeria thing's over with. I feel like these are all really good points. I think you know what has to happen. I think you know that Messeria can't be here anymore. Do you understand what I'm saying? This is the offer you can't refuse. And Luciano's like, 10-4, loud and clear. We're going to go ahead and make that happen. Messeria somehow finds out about this secret meeting and immediately goes to Joe Adonis and orders a hit on Lucky Luciano for meeting with Maranzano, thinking that this was going to happen. Adonis, being one of these young Turks, along with Lucky, immediately walks over to Lucky. He's like, hey, man, Messeria wants to kill you. And Lucky's like, perfect. We want to kill him too. Mm-hmm. Let's just beat him to the punch. Maranzano said something along the lines to finish the meeting, and again, this could just be crazy Italian hyperbole. He said, let's make this a bloody Easter. Just a very threatening thing because it's going to happen in April. April 15th, 1931, Luciano calls up Messeria. He's like, we need to meet for lunch. We need to have a talk. He took him to a place called Nuova Via, which is on Coney Island. Excuse me, it was Messeria's favorite place to eat. Absolutely loved it. They go inside. They sit at a table in the back. They're playing cards. For some reason, there's some dumbass contention about this that we'll talk about here in a second. Sitting there for a while, Luciano allegedly says that he's got to get up and go to the bathroom. Goes into the bathroom, starts washing his hands. Gunmen come in, and these guys, you're going to understand some of these names here in a second. Anastasia, the guy that was one of Messeria's top guys. Genovese comes in. Joe Adonis comes in. So 3 guys that have been very involved with Messeria. And then this little fella named Bugsy Siegel.
When I kept seeing his name pop up in all this, I was just like, fuck me.
Well, he pops up in Vegas too.
I know.
Hey, the guy was he was a hell of a killer. He's going to be a fun episode too.
It's weird. He seems like a made up character.
Yeah. Well, Bugsy Siegel doesn't sound like a real person.
He's a mobster Forrest Gump.
Yeah. That's perfect. That's what he is. They go ahead and roll into the Nuova Villa, and all of a sudden, Messeria's bodyguards are nowhere to be found. So everybody knew that this was going to happen to Messeria, even down to his bodyguards that didn't want to get involved. Mm-hmm. I believe he was shot in the head, he was shot in the back, chest. Those were probably entrance-exit wounds. Supposedly, when they did the autopsy, they said that he had an empty stomach, so he didn't even get a last meal. I don't know if that's like a sweet Italian kind of joke that he didn't have a last meal.
A fate worse than death.
Yep. Yeah, a fate worse than death is dying on an empty stomach. For sure. After the shooting happens, this guy who has maybe my favorite Italian nickname, Ciro, the Artichoke King Terranova, was supposed to be the getaway driver.
I love it because it's just so on the fucking nose. It's the most literal name because this guy, there was an artichoke racket where this guy would essentially have like the control of all of the artichoke fields or supply lines and would be like ratcheting up the price on artichokes in New York City.
He's the
you
guy.
You gotta be real careful with what profession you choose.
Yeah.
Because if it's dumb, you're getting a dumb fucking nickname.
Every time you go to a restaurant and they have spinach and artichoke dip, he leans over and is like, hey, you're welcome.
Can you imagine if there was like somebody manufacturing like sex toys back then? And then it's like, he's the rubber dick king. Staten Island.
Dildo Sicilian. Mm-hmm. Ciro was the getaway driver. Supposedly, he was so shocked by this that once Bugsy got in, he told him to get the fuck out of the seat, and Bugsy was the one that drove away. Misseria's death has never been solved. Nobody's ever been arrested for Misseria's death. Luciano somehow had an alibi saying that he was in the bathroom and not at the table when it happened. Like, I feel like if you're in the same restaurant that a guy gets whacked and you're one of his guys, that's probably not a good alibi.
Well, at the same time, if they're one of his guys, then they're not suspecting the guys that came in and murdered him to also be his
Fair.
guys.
Okay,
Which
yeah.
means that, if anything, Luciano could have been like, thank God I was in the bathroom because I would have been dead
Could have been
too.
me. Yeah, okay. That makes more sense.
You're thinking about it because you have all the information.
Yeah. So, Misseria falls. Misseria's gone. And with Maranzano winning this Castellamarese War, he immediately starts setting into motion the whole reason that he came over from Sicily. The whole reason that he was in America was to take over the mob in the United States. He restructures the hierarchy of the New York Mafia, dividing them into 5 families. This, again, is another Caesar reference because he referred to them as legions. So he was raising legions just like the Roman army did. They had clear structures.
I like someone with theatricality like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He...
A
None
little
of these,
bit of like scholarly flair to it.
I think I probably would have had more fun with Misseria just because he seems like he was more of a good time. But, like, if I wanted to go suit shopping, Maranzano would be my guy.
Also, with Misseria, this thing probably isn't still around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
True. He kind of laid the groundwork, and then Maranzano kind of added the structure to it. But yeah, they, just like Chris listed out, they had all these clear jobs for everybody to go ahead and run through. So there was a point of contact for everybody going through. So more of a business. But at the same time, businesses don't always work out if you have a shitty CEO. And Maranzano was planning on being a CEO.
Exactly. So Maranzano, like I was saying, he splits it up into 5 families. And like we just discussed, the structure of the families is that each family has a boss. And so you're like, well, okay, so how does Maranzano actually structure this? Is he the head of one family? You know, but then he's on, you know, he has parity with all the other bosses technically. Well, he actually declares himself the capo di tutti capi, which is the boss of all bosses. So just in case there was any confusion, it's your boss's boss.
Yep. And as your boss's boss, one of those things that he promised about not taking a cut of all of their rackets immediately goes out the window, and he starts charging just as much, if not more, than Misseria. And that really is starting to piss these guys off. Because, like, we just killed this guy for you, and you said that things were going to be different, and now you're just more on top of coming around and taking our money.
We feel a little cheated.
Yeah. And,
We feel like you're not doing what you said you were going to do.
well, and this whole Mustache Pete bravado that these guys had was just like Chris was talking about. It was something that the American generations were just like, this is fucking dumb.
Here's the other thing, too. Naming off all these guys that we've talked about, these guys are all kind of in that Young Turks
Yeah.
generation. So really the guys that are in these made men positions, and even at this point, some of them maybe being underbosses, capos at this point, so being captains, they don't have the same mindset as now the guy that's in charge is still kind of what they feel like is holding them back. Like not allowing them to essentially like realize their full potential. At this point, they're trying to treat it as an actual business where they feel like they want to establish themselves almost as like corporations. They feel like they can have that much that much power.
Well, and kind of nobody wants that too, because they've realized that every time somebody becomes the full-on leader, the capo di capa, or capo de tutti capi, whatever, that guy doesn't live long.
Not only that, but at the same time, if that guy gets threatened, you all have to get into a fight just because this guy wants you to get in a fight. So you're kind of just beholden to whatever this guy's telling you to do.
You want a rational person at the top.
Exactly. Before we go any further, take a bathroom break.
Okay.
Well, hey there, all you sexy historians. How you guys doing?
It is time for
Socials.
Where can they find us on Instagram?
If they want to follow us, they can find us at Historically High Pod on Instagram.
That goes the same for Threads as well. You can also find us on Twitter.
Tell them about Twitter.
Historically High. That's historically HI on Twitter.
And if you want to email any of your comments or suggestions, where can they find us at, Adam?
At historically high podcast at gmail.com.
Gmail. All right, and back to the show. All right, and we're back. So as things currently stand in the Mafia, Lucky Luciano and a few others are not happy with how Maranzano is running things.
Days of Our Italian Lives returns. So yeah, this generational gap had kind of driven a wedge that we'll see comes to a very, very bloody conclusion in many different ways. But the Young Turks decide that they can't really have any more Maranzano. His final mistake, as Chris brought up earlier, the Capo de Tutti Capi, boss of all bosses claim, was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. His dislike for non-Sicilian mobsters was something that really couldn't be hidden anymore. And somebody that was half and half business partners with a guy named Meyer Lansky, who was an Irish or a Jewish mobster that sort of helped shape Lucky to be the guy that he was, because they both worked under Arnold Rothstein and had been friends since they were like 9 years old. That's not going to look good because Lansky is tied to Luciano. Luciano's not going to let go of him. He tolerates Maranzano, and that's about the only thing that you get.
Well, and I think about it from this sense, it's not just his dislike of them only affected the family that he was, running and everything. He wouldn't let the other guys. He was preventing the other guys from making these choices too. So if you had someone like Meyer Lansky, where Luciano's like, hey, if we can get this guy more involved, we can be making more money. He has connections to industries or, rackets.
Shit's going good for us now.
Yeah, exactly. Like, why are we trying to do this? Also, it's kind of like I was talking about before. You're limiting your pool. Like, how do you feel like you're supposed to get the best people in these positions and run it like a successful business? This is where you start just like hiring your like sister's like your nephew for a position. He has no experience or no business being there, but because he's your nephew, he gets into this role.
Yeah, this was Italian I guess it's not nepotism. Well, maybe a little bit,
Italian.
but
yeah.
Like
Their family.
Sicilianism or something.
Do you think that's what Olive Garden is really getting at when you're here, your family?
So I was trying to make this comparison for Maranzano, a little look behind the curtain, trying to make this comparison between Maranzano and Masseria. Maranzano feels like a classy Italian place, and Masseria feels like an Olive Garden, because Olive Garden puts on the front of Italian, but their food's pretty white.
Yeah.
Like, as far as their dishes go, it's just not quite the same.
You're telling me that soup, salad, and endless breadsticks is not just 100% authentic Italian.
Yeah, Italian wedding soup, just all the different names, all that. A tour of Italy. A tour of Italy would feed like a fucking village in Italy.
It's not a piece of lasagna, some chicken parm.
And then some other pasta on top of that, isn't it? So this rub occurs where Maranzano is kind of sick of Luciano and sick of Jesus Christ.
Meyer
Lansky just being friends. They end up having to fly to Chicago because they want to meet with Capone. Maranzano grabs Luciano, like, you're my second in command, you come on with me. Luciano's like, okay, well, Meyer's coming with us. And he's like, no, he's not Sicilian. He's not coming with us. Luciano's like, okay, well, I'm not going to come either then. Capone and I have been friends since we were kids too. He knows Meyer Lansky. We're all very close. If he's not going, I'm not going. So Maranzano's like, okay, he can come too, I guess. They go to Chicago, go into the meeting with Capone, and all of a sudden, Maranzano looks at Meyer and goes, you're not coming in. You got to stay out here. That immediately pisses Luciano off because he knows that Meyer Lansky's very good with numbers and he has a very, very good memory. And he's his business partner. They're best friends.
Keen business mind.
So it kind of, the writing's on the wall. The rest of the Young Turks are sick of Maranzano. Luciano, who has the favor of a lot of people. At one point, him and Meyer Lansky were talking to somebody. Maybe it was just Meyer Lansky. But he said that they were the only two people in the family that everybody just universally trusted. Like, they were the only people that had all of the goodwill. So if Luciano knocks off Maranzano, if he were to make himself the Capi di Tutti Capi, they'd probably be like, yeah, dude, we trust you. You have the same vision that we do. We'll follow you. But they didn't want it because they knew that kings don't last long. So Maranzano finally has kind of had enough of Luciano as well. He's really, really had enough of Meyer Lansky. And for a guy who works with the Sicilians, I think this is fairly smart. He ends up recruiting an Irish mobster named Vincent Mad Dog Cole, which a Sicilian guy who says he only works with Sicilian guys goes and tries to get an Irishman to kill them. Is that to try to make
Distance himself from it.
Yeah. So, like, the only time you do that
Because
is to cover
I'm
your
pretty
ass.
sure that at one point or another, they were all at war. Like, the Italians and the Irish were at war.
Yeah.
And the Jewish and Irish were at war. And then it was all just kind of interchangeable. So it stands to reason to be like, there's bad blood kind of maybe all around to some degree, you know. So,
But money talks.
Yeah.
He can hire an Irish gangster to come over and try to kill Luciano. And in a weird page out of Masseria's book, he goes and talks to a newly made man, Tommy Lucchese, and tells Lucchese about the plan. And all of a sudden, just like Joe had done the first time around, Lucchese immediately goes to Lucky and he's like, hey, Maranzano wants to kill you. And again, Luciano's like, cool, we were planning on offing him too. We'll just have to beat him to the punch. And this happens in just an incredibly, this is the most cinematic part of this whole thing to me. So September 10th, 1931, there's a team of Jewish hitmen, a guy named Sam Red Levine, Bo Weinberg, and Bugsy Siegel, pops his head back up again.
a small town.
The issue that the mob ran into a lot was the IRS and federal agents were always poking around trying to see, I mean, what'd they get Capone on? Tax evasion. They're trying to poke around your finances to see what they can find. So a raid by the IRS or anything like that wasn't too uncommon.
Here's another thing that just kind of occurred to me. So another reason to get rid of someone that's at the very, very head of the table
Yeah.
is for this reason, like you're talking about. If that person gets busted, they know about everybody else's dealings. There's no distancing yourself from that person because they'll have records that connect them to you, and you want to separate yourself into a position where you're almost kind of compartmentalized, so you can't get blamed for something that you're not involved with.
Yeah. And that's why we had to create RICO laws eventually after this, was to try to bring down the Italian mob, because these guys were the bosses were so far away and compartmentalized from the hits that were going on the street and the trafficking and the
also
rackets.
each other's businesses and stuff like that. Yeah.
So they had to figure out a way to be able, I fucking forgot what RICO stands for. Look it up. But they had to figure out a way to try to get a hold of these mob bosses, because their hands, while dirty, were still the cleanest of the bunch because they weren't in it. So if you can create something like a RICO or a racketeering charge.
Racketeer Influenced and Corruption Organizations Act.
Yeah, so you don't have to be at a crime to be linked into the crime.
Do you think there was a point when the NYPD, is probably still dealing with this, but when it became, started becoming a real issue, is they would bust some type of like racket or ring, and they would be like, who do you think this fucking belongs to? Like, which one of these families is running this one? And then eventually, just through like detective work, they'd be like, well, these guys run the, the sanitation, and these guys run the steel union, and these guys run that. But at some point, they were just like, who the fuck is running all of this shit?
Why does this keep happening?
Yeah.
I'm sure we're going to talk about this during what would have to feel like a fucking 15-part J. Edgar Hoover episode. But and Edgar was a little bit after these guys and just went for forever. I think he came into office in like the 30s or something like that with the FBI. But he didn't believe whether being honest or not, that the mob was that big of a deal, that what would become and what is sort of now La Cosa Nostra, which means our thing.
Yeah, it's
Pretty fucking cool name.
yeah,
It sounds awesome. Like it's our thing or something like
it's
that.
our thing or this thing of ours.
Yeah.
Which is pretty cool. Also, mafia, it's derived from the Sicilian word mafioso, which means swagger, boldness, and bravado.
It sounds like an Italian sumo
You
wrestler.
literally named your thing swagger.
Yeah. It's pretty cool.
You're the Italian swagger.
I don't like a lot of the shit that I did, but I will give them credit for as bad as their names were. They figured out some cool titles. But Hoover didn't believe that the mob was that big of a deal. And because the FBI didn't start to try to press, RICO didn't become a thing until Hoover was out. Like, that's how long it took them to try to figure out
Because
how
Hoover
to do
didn't care. He was in control. And as soon as he was out, they were like, okay, there's this thing we need to fucking do.
it. Yep. Hoover kept squashing it.
Someone holding their breath and be like, the mob is real. I couldn't say when he was here. The mob is fucking real.
Why were we
I've
at
got
MLK
files
rallies?
and files.
So these local police forces could only do so much. And I think that's kind of what you were getting to is
While also having people that work for them on the payroll. So you're being sabotaged from within.
well, and the only reason that they knew about this IRS raid or this tax agent raid or whatever was because somebody from the inside had probably given them information that they were going to have a tax audit at some point. So this was kind of like the perfect setup. And whether that person just fed them a line to make this all happen, who knows? But September 10th was supposed to be the day that this was going to happen. And so all of Maranzano's hitmen and everybody that was with him, all of his security, left their guns at home. Because if
Not
you're going
Maranzano. Oh, the hitmen that were going to kill Maranzano. Luciano's hitman.
No. The hitman, his security staff that was inside to protect Maranzano.
Gotcha. So when the IRS came in, no one was armed.
Yep, because you don't want to catch an illegal gun charge in that situation.
And you know that those guys are going to be like looking for that shit
yeah.
because that's what they're in there for, along with the records.
Yeah, just to try to get anything on you. If they're going to go through your taxes, if they see an open gun, they're like, felony!
Yeah.
Felony now. So there comes a knock at the door of this penthouse that was in Manhattan that was kind of Maranzano's office, and looks out the door, and they see three Jewish guys who look Midwestern kind of standing out front. Like, okay, well, it's the tax guys, so they're going to be coming in. Sort of funny that they thought it was going to be tax guys, and it was the Jewish mob that came and did it. But they opened...
Poetic.
Yeah,
is
a
the term
little
for
bit.
that. Yeah.
All of their predispositions about Jewish people being good with money or greedy, all of a sudden they were the tax agents. The doors open, and Jewish hitmen, like I said, Sam Levine, Bo Weinberg, and Bugsy Siegel come in. All of them pull out their guns, which I'm sure was probably pretty shocking to think that the IRS guys were packing. And then they hear their accents. And once they hear the accents, they're like, that's not a Midwest accent. That's not, no, these guys are, that's a New York accent. They push Maranzano back into his office, and Bugsy Siegel essentially looks down at him, and for all the hate and vitriol that Maranzano had said about the Jewish mobsters and the Jewish mob and how they weren't Sicilian and they were dirty people, Bugsy just went ahead and filleted him like a fish. Just absolutely, everybody got out their knives. All three of the hitmen got out their knives and just started carving his ass up. And then right after they did that, they shot and killed him. And then after they did that, they walked past all of Maranzano's security that did not have guns, that were just up against the wall with their hands up because they couldn't do anything.
Not that they would attempt to probably do anything.
No. I'm sure at that point they realized that if the head guy dies, they're probably pretty safe either way. So, all of a sudden, Maranzano's gone, and we have no Capo de Titu Capi anymore.
Because Luciano is the one that actually kind of arranged for all of this to happen, and because he was kind of the leading voice, probably out of the five families, probably was the closest one to Maranzano. They kind of looked at him and they're like, well, if anybody's going to be taking the Capo di tutti capi, boss of all bosses role, it's going to be Luciano. And to a degree, there was kind of just a feeling of being okay with that, because they kind of felt like he was leading them in the right direction. Well, he goes and throws kind of everyone for a loop when he's like, I don't want the title. I'm not going to be the boss of all bosses. What we're going to go ahead and do, because he, again, they want to steer this thing. They're trying to get as legitimate as they can at this point, while still doing the things that let them fill the vices that are being needing the supply.
Yeah, and they, along with that, they don't go straight immediately. They do something called the Night of Sicilian Vespers. It's pretty sick.
I don't mean straight. I mean legitimate
Yeah.
in the sense of it's not like bootlegging and shit like that. Like they're still skimming off the top. They're still
Yeah.
making shady deals and everything. They're still having additional inflation to like construction contracts and stuff like that. But they're being able to more hide it under the guise of like legitimate businesses, and so.
Well, before we get to that, Luciano, after he committed the murder, did something that no other mafia boss had ever really done. He came out to all the other families. He's like, hey, we killed Maranzano. That was me. If anybody has any issues with it, I'm open to talking about it. But he's like, just understand that we were the ones that did it. We're not going to hide behind anything. That was us. Not because we want to take credit for it, but we just want to be honest about what happened. You guys know that he was a Mustache Pete. He was being a dickhead. He lied to us before. So if you guys are okay with this, we can move forward. If not, we'll field some questions.
Well, and the way he decides to move forward is by forming the commission.
Oh, sorry, not again. Before the commission happens, what I was talking about with the Night of Sicilian Vespers was just kind of like a large party that took about a month in Detroit, in Chicago, in New York, where they just went through and killed all the Mustache Petes.
It's like the Night of Long Knives.
I think so.
That the Nazis ended up doing.
Yeah. So all these old guards, anybody that could have come in and said Maranzano was one of
Retaliate
ours,
or something like that.
Yeah, they just went through and wiped them out immediately. So you kill off all the Mustache Petes. It's only young Turks. If there's any Mustache Petes alive, like I just saw what you guys did, carry on. I retire.
I'm out.
Yeah. So yeah, then talk about this commission.
So Luciano forms the commission, basically using the five family structure created by Maranzano, but just getting rid of the boss of all bosses rule. Everybody would operate with, independence from one another, not be beholden to the other one's rules for letting in people or making people certain roles or however they wanted to handle that stuff or who they wanted to work with. They would respect each other's like territories and domains and businesses. They weren't at war, so of course they're like, you don't mess with this, I don't mess with this. They would sometimes work with each other if there was like mutually beneficial things.
Yeah.
But what this also allowed is kind of like I was alluding to before, it allowed them to separate. And I think Luciano, one of the reasons he did that was he was like, I don't want to be on the hook for anybody else. So I can distance myself. I can still be making the money that I'm going to be making and everything, still have control of my family, but I'm not going to get popped if dumbass over here ends up getting sniffed out by the feds or something like that.
Yeah, and it's also the perfect cover, too, because if you make a bad call or a bad decision, it's all on you. But if you do it by commission, all of a sudden everybody shares in the blame if something goes wrong. So if you make a bad mistake, they could kill you. If the commission makes a bad mistake, they're not killing everybody in the commission.
And this isn't like a weekly meeting like they're all getting together.
No.
Literally, the commission met once every 5 years. So they would have like the meeting of the bosses when they would all, get together.
Or in case when family problems arose.
Yep. Get in a warehouse, table set up. They'd all talk about shit. Hash out any beefs that they had, building up within the last 5 years. And for a while, it really did work because everyone felt like they kind of had a seat at the table. Everyone felt like they were responsible for themselves and weren't beholden to anybody else. At this point, the families end up becoming what we know them as today. So we get let's see. Okay, so you have them listed as the old names for the families, correct?
Yep.
Okay, so essentially when they were first formed, the original five families of this kind of new era is Luciano, Mangano, Gagliano,
Bonanno,
and
Profaci
families. And then there was also a Chicago outfit, a Buffalo family boss. The ones we were talking about were just centralized in New York. You also had one, I think, in like maybe Los Angeles at that point.
They
Las
could have spread
Vegas,
out that far.
Las Vegas, definitely. Yeah. They said like New Orleans, Dallas, but those would just be single families because they were smaller areas that could just be run by one family.
Well, the first kind of outline that Maranzano put out for the commission, Capone and the Chicago outfit weren't a part of it. Stefano Magaddino the Buffalo family boss, he wasn't a part of it either. So the commission now under Luciano was like, we need these guys. These guys are very important to us. We're not playing favorites anymore.
If we want to get bigger, there's an untapped market across the entire United States.
Yeah.
We need these guys' supply lines to be able to, get into these areas.
And to kind of we'll finish with sort of the first problem and how they took care of it and kind of how it came back to bite Lucky in the ass. But
Luciano did end up being the chairman of the commission.
Yeah.
Which basically just means that essentially he's probably running the meetings.
We're gathered here today.
He was probably the guy that chose the location. And I want to say that they still, like, it's not quite a secret anymore when they have a meeting of the bosses. Like, I think the last one might have been in, like, Chicago or something like that, where there was actually news coverage of, like, bosses meeting.
Really?
Yeah. But also, I think at the same time now, they're sort of, it's more like, I don't know. I'm talking out of my ass because I'm not an East Coast person and not from a big city. But I don't think that they're quite as invested in things as they used to be. Like, I think it's more for show now.
Okay.
But
Yeah, there have been fucking reality TV shows.
Growing Up Gotti.
God damn it.
Yep. They're
They've
still
been turned
around.
into reality TV stars.
I'm sure, yeah, they probably have, huh? Because I'm sure there's like Real Housewives of New York that somebody has a shady Italian last name. Also, rap in New York, whether it be by accident or just knowing this history like it was taught in school, we'll talk about something here in a second called Murder Inc., which is Ja Rule's label, with a guy...
Murder!
Yeah, with a guy named Irv Gotti, a black guy named Irv Gotti. Like it's
Okay.
there's certain names that pop out. Little Caesar, Notorious B.I.G. had an MC named Lil C's. Like it's just New York rap had to have been influenced so heavily by the mafia because they were the guys making the decisions out on the streets and they were the gangsters. Like,
Childish Gambino.
yep. Do you know how he got that name?
He went into an internet search engine, right?
A Wu-Tang name generator.
Okay.
And Childish Gambino came out for Donald Glover. But the influence is just so heavy because those guys were the shot callers. And rap music out of New York is always going to be able to reference them because that's where they grew up and that's how much of an influence these guys had, even after they died in New York. So their first challenge, 1935, a guy named Dutch Schultz. Dutch Schultz was being pursued by a guy named, a guy who was a special prosecutor. His name was Thomas Dewey. He was coming after him for tax evasion. Dutch had been tried for the same tax case like 2 or 3 times. The first time was a hung jury. The second time, Dewey had moved it to another place, and he ended up being acquitted of the charges, but Dewey was still hot on Dutch's tail. So the commission gets called, 1935, 1931. This was called a little bit before the 5 years. And Dutch comes in. He's like, got to kill Dewey. Luciano's like, no, you idiot. We're not going to kill the special prosecutor because if we kill the special prosecutor and they start investigating all the people that he was trying to prosecute, they're going to come into our business. And if they come into our business and they start looking at everything that we're doing, we're all going to go down because you want to kill this prosecutor. And Schultz was like,
We're doing so good.
yeah.
Why do you want to fuck this up?
Yep. And I believe Dutch Schultz was Jewish, so I'm sure the Italians were like, this is why we don't want these guys around. They're starting shit. So Dutch Schultz is like, pound sand. I'm going to get out of here. Murder Inc. boss, Albert Anastasia, who was a part of the hit on Masseria, must not have been let into the family, so he created Murder Inc., or it was an affiliate of the Commission of the 5 Families. Immediately goes to Luciano. He's like, hey, Schultz is going to kill that guy. He came to me to ask if I would do the hit on Dewey. And Luciano's like, okay, well, thanks for the information. I appreciate it. We'll see what happens. They get a guy they bring in. His name is Lepke Buckhalter, and Buckhalter is ordered to kill Schultz and kills Schultz like right outside of his apartment. So that was how the commission handled their first potential family business. Was Schultz said, I need to kill this guy. And then Luciano's like, well, he's going to try to do it, so we just need to kill him anyway. He won't take no for an answer, so we have to kill him before he fucks up.
And then, as we know it today, we're going to do essentially kind of a more modern episode on this. This was kind of more of an origin episode. The five families as they're known today are the Gambinos, the Lucchese, the Genovese, the Bonanno, and the Colombo. Is that correct?
It sounds right.
So,
But they changed, I think, as bosses were probably in for longer periods of time.
and what's crazy is they don't like. It's nice that they don't change them every time a new boss with like a different name comes in. They're like, fuck it, we've already got the stationery and the business cards and all that. I don't want to fucking have to switch out. Shit's monogrammed. I don't want to have to fucking figure that out. The cars are already titled underneath this LLC. I don't want to have to change that shit. It's just so much fucking work. We'll just stick with the name.
That has to be the only reason.
But I mean, this is something that literally just permeates like all types of like pop culture, just anything in society is, you get the fucking Bills Mafia, you got 3-6 Mafia. There's so many things that like, these guys, when you think of gangsters, like these are the guys that are the fucking Tommy gun wielders, fucking popping out of fucking trash cans and doing drive-bys and shit like that.
Yeah. It's the origin story for so many different storylines. And one that jumped out at me, and this goes to show that Lucky Luciano may not have been so lucky. Because they didn't let Schultz kill Thomas Dewey. And we won't get a whole lot into this, but I just want to plant how far this goes that I was so confused by and brought up to you. Thomas Dewey eventually ends up taking down Lucky Luciano on like 60 counts of prostitution, running a prostitution ring. And Luciano gets, I want to say it was like 25 to 40 years for all these counts of prostitution. So Luciano
if that's all they can get you on, they're going to get you, because they know you're doing the other shit, they're going to get you on every single one of the counts. It's not just going to be like, we're going to get you on a couple. They're like, every fucking one of them.
Well, just like tax evasion with Capone, it was never going to be what he deserved, but they were going to get him on whatever technicality they could. So he goes to prison. Doesn't really change much. Luciano's still calling shots from inside prison, but he finally gets tired of it. He gets tired of it in a way to where he's like, hey, World War II is going on. Can I speak to somebody? They end up cutting a deal with Luciano to deport him, to commute his sentence, and then deport him back to Sicily on the
grounds.
Yeah, I guess that you would say on the grounds.
On the dun 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 on the fucking mission, actually.
Yeah, that he would help provide the U.S. Navy with spots and understandings of where to land in Sicily, friendlies, other mob members in Sicily that they're still connected to provide guns, support, anything like that.
Disruption of Italian supply lines.
Yes.
I mean, these guys had their hands in so much shit over there that to basically approach the Navy in wartime and be like, I think you're going to want to hear what I'm going to say. I got some people over where you're wanting to get, and I think we can help each other out here. Okay, well, we're going to send your ass back to Sicily. As long as I'm not in fucking jail, cool.
Make sure to get that asshole Mussolini out before you send me back.
You need us to let us know where the nice beaches are.
Yeah. So, but in essence, another thing that they said that he kind of promised, and I don't know if this was just him shit talking or not, but he promised that there wouldn't be a disruption in any of the naval yards because they controlled the workflow in the naval yards.
Not only that, but probably like maybe not directly that. I'm sure there was some presence.
Yeah.
But the steel foundries.
Yeah.
And all that kind of stuff. So
anything that they could kind of use as leverage to get Luciano out, they did. But to think, and I love this on both sides of it.
Can you imagine being the feds across from him in that office and being like, so here's the deal, guys. I will help you figure out places where you can possibly land to invade the Nazis and the Italians in Italy and Sicily and everything. Also, I'll make sure that you guys can keep building your battleships. I'm like, what? Fuck you. And he's like, let me get someone on the phone. Gets him on the phone. He's like, shut down production. They're like, no. Nope. Fuck, we're going to have to let this guy go.
He's not bluffing.
I know. To have that fucking kind of power and influence, I mean, you're taking advantage in wartime and everything, but still, that's fucking nuts.
I love this on both sides because on the side of trying to win a war, and you pointed it out when we were texting about it, The fact that the United States military was willing to go to the mob to find some sort of an advantage, whether it was a huge advantage or a small advantage, they still put out feelers to help or to get help from the mob to land in Sicily to try to take this back. That's how desperate they were. Was they were willing to work with anybody to make this happen.
No rules.
That's how you win a war.
You're trying to end a war as quickly as you fucking possibly can, and if you have an ace that just happens to be in a jail cell up your sleeve, fucking let that ace breathe.
And also, I love it from the mob perspective and from Luciano's perspective, because he probably had a pretty cushy jail cell. Like, his jail life probably wasn't bad.
He ended up coming back to the States at some point, right?
I don't know if he ever did, because once he got deported, I think he's probably persona non grata in America. I'm sure he came back for a night or two in Vegas.
I'm sure he had a pretty decent, comfortable life over in Sicily.
Yeah. But just from his perspective, grew up in America, came over when he was like 9, so he doesn't really have a memory of it. But he's like, if I can't live here, I want to go back and live in the motherland. Like, I'll have it pretty good in Sicily too. Yeah. But it worked out well for everybody. This whole, I don't even know. I can't even put a number, like even an estimate on the mob episodes that we can get out of just them.
Yeah.
We also have the Irish mob. We also have the Jewish mob that we can get into. The Yakuza overseas, all of that kind of stuff. And it all is, like, this is just an extension of drug cartels. And gang wars that we've done before it's all the same thing, just under a different name.
Yeah.
Except for these we kind of see because the Italian-American mob happened on our soil for once.
Yeah, it's just our version of it.
Yeah.
Every country has their version of it. All right, man, you got anything else?
No, I'm excited to do more of these for sure.
I know. All right, guys, thanks for joining us again. Remember, rate, review, subscribe, 5 stars if you would be so kind, and we'll keep doing this thing for you.
Before we finish, as far as like the Spotify commenting goes, I wanted to bring this up a couple times. We love seeing them. Good or bad. I mean, the bad ones hurt a little bit, but the good ones far outweigh the bad ones, and they lift us up.
They give me something to laugh at when I wake up in the morning to take my shit.
Yeah. But there's no real way for us to reply to stuff on there. So keep posting on there. We love seeing them. It helps us because it's interaction with our episodes through Spotify. At the same time, don't feel shy to reach out on any of our social medias or anything like that. We love hearing from you guys. So if you have commented something on Spotify or asked a question or anything like that, it's not that we're ignoring you. We just haven't figured out how to reply to those things.
Yeah. Just go through social media and you'll get a reply pretty quickly.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Later.
Peace.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining us for another episode. If you like what you heard, hit that subscribe and like button. Follow us. If you didn't like what you heard, still hit that anyway, because we'll probably cover something in the future that you do like. Please follow us on our social media. Adam, hit him with it.
Our Instagram is Historically High Pod, Historically High POD, and we are on Twitter at Historically High. That's Historically HI.
All right. And if you guys want to send in any feedback, suggestions, hit us up on those two, or you can even do it on Gmail. It's historicallyhighpodcast@gmail.com. Thanks again.
Peace.